Hi, I'm Chris from Airwindows, and I've had a very busy week because there's been a bunch of controversy about floating point dither and such, and my attempts to make the most amazing audio ever. So this week, the plugin that I'm bringing you does not make the most amazing audio ever. Seriously, it really doesn't. But this is a sort of precursor to some of the stuff that I'm doing with the most recent Dither style plugin, StudioTan, which has the most recent version of not just another dither in it, but also a couple of things called dither me timbres in StudioTan. And what those do is look at where we're doing truncation in the sound and choose which way to go based on EQ rather than based on fidelity. So what this is like a precursor to that. Cojones is a plugin that measures a set of samples and then takes the middle of those samples and tries to work out whether it's exaggerating sort of the bristliness and pointiness of it or minimizing it. So what you get is a strange kind of excitory behavior that's difficult to even describe or interpret. And I don't have the ideal audio to demonstrate this, but what I can do is play some sound and just fool with it a little bit. And basically, if this sounds like an interesting concept, then you should just experiment with it. Because you never know what you can make happen with things like these. And this is promised because this existed as a audio unit only back in the day. So it's one of those ones where I said, I will bring this out for VST and all, and this is what I'm doing. It sounds like this. A little more bristliness going on. Or a lot. Or we'll take it out. And we've also got this other control called Breathy. It's got a kind of air band thing going on there. And we can use that to sort of mute a little bit too. And lastly, this is kind of, body is kind of a combination of various things having to do with it. It'll thicken things up a little bit or thin them right out. So basically, this is just a kind of plugin for making strange alterations to the tonality in a way that doesn't really fit with normal EQs. And there's not all that much to say about it because this isn't going to set the world on fire. But it does have the dithering to floating point, like everything else. Even if it's not the most musical plugin in the world, it does still have that going on because I'm going to be doing that from now on. And it does let you do some crazy stuff. Some tonalities that you might not necessarily get otherwise. See how it's not changing the EQ that much? So electric piano with no cojones, or all of the cojones. It sort of accentuates a midrangey quality in a way. Let's play with Breathy. And of course you can get gritty distortion out of it in a weird way. by just exaggerating it and doing terrible things. And again, this is having a EQ-like effect, but it's not actually an EQ process. So weirdness enabled, as it were. And of course we got our dry wet for letting you do this kind of madness. Let's do the opposite. So that's pretty strange. A little cojones on that sucker. I'm not even sure what that was. Some kind of synthesizer. It's a strangeness. Let's hear it again. Oh wait, I just did. So we can isolate individual elements even in the middle of a mix using this crazy thing. And it's not really meant for full mixes. What you want to do is use this on individual tracks and probably use it lightly rather than push it till, because this is one of those ones, and back in the day I was doing this too, where I let you get horrible, ugly sounds out of it by pushing it too far. Like the logical thing would be to restrict it so that it only gives nice results. And I don't like to do that because there's a lot of people, including some of my best friends and biggest fans, that just crave taking these things and abusing them terribly and making awful, awful things happen. And I respect that a lot. That is just fun. So we will be allowing that. Cojones is available as Mac audio unit, Mac, VC, and Linux. Mac, PC, Windows, and Linux VST. And the whole thing, including the stuff I've got coming up over the next month, is supported by Patreon. Patreon is the reason I can experiment with weird stuff like this and not panic if it becomes controversial. Because rather than depending upon being able to stump up a bunch of PR from the usual suspects, I depend entirely on just users of my plugins and people for whom I've done stuff. And that's why I have the freedom to do whatever I want. And this week, what I want is to put out Cojones because that was promised a long time ago. It's on the list of stuff that is supposed to be released. It may or may not be useful to you. If it's not, that's perfectly okay. Not everything that I do works for everybody. In fact, I've often felt that if I was doing something that was meant to work for everybody, that's the wrong thing for me to be doing. Anything that I do ought to offend at least somebody. Otherwise, it's not enough of a thing in itself. I will be following this up with a series of plugins that I think you'll find interesting. One of them is something inspired by, not sure if you can see this, but this device that I'm holding in my hand, it's called MIDI-verb. And MIDI-verb, classic old Alesis lo-fi reverb, not really lo-fi by intent, more lo-fi as in that's all they had those days, is known to have kind of a magical tone quality while also being kind of pants as far as fidelity is concerned. And I've worked out one of the reasons why that is. The thing about MIDI-verb is that it is so primitive that it doesn't have a multiply unit. So every single process in it that is part of a reverb or a delay or a all-pass filter is executed using a 0.5 multiplier or something like that rather than a actual mathematical multiplier. In other words, this little puppy runs entirely on bit shift gain just like in my plugin. And it benefits from that in that for every digital word it has in there, no matter what it's doing, the digital word does not change its mantissa. It just loses resolution as you modify the exponent. But we're getting into the dither and floating point stuff again. And I promised myself I wouldn't do that. I would just tell you about Cojones and get out of there. Suffice to say that I am working, or indeed have worked on, a reverb plugin along the same lines in which every single gain change inside it operates on the same principle as bit shift gain. Goodbye to my YouTube advertising revenue, because I just said the words bit shift gain and it thinks I said a naughty word. Suffice to say, I've got some very cool plugins coming out in the next few weeks. I've got this reverb plugin. I think you'll like the way that sounds. I have got Purist Squish coming out. And Purist Squish has been improved substantially from what I had back when I first put out Purist Squish. It is a severely updated version and fully VST and all the platforms you can have VSTs on. And I even came up with a thing which I'm calling Block Party. And that is a unholy hybridization of Purist Squish and the one-corner clip algorithm. It works kind of like a limiter. I'm not sure if I'd call it a limiter because it's maybe not as precise and well-behaved as you normally get from like really well-designed limiters. But it ought to have or at least I've been doing the work on it. It does have a good sound. And hopefully people will be able to use that for some of the stuff where, you do compression and set it up to specifically make this blocky, dense sound without any peaks left over. Because one thing about stuff like Purist Squish is that Purist Squish and Pressure and a lot of my sort of very Muse style plugins will let some peaks through as they go. And stuff like PyWacket lets lots of peaks through because that's kind of the whole point of its operation, is cleanly delineating peaks and then controlling the sustain. Basically, this is going to be a fun month or so, following up this rather what the heck style plugin Cojones. And maybe you'll find Cojones useful in some kind of way. I don't really know. It's weird, and it's not especially musical. And as you can hear, or as you've heard, I'll show you again. Although it does stuff, it's kind of weird, and it's changing the tone and texture of the sound in ways that aren't specifically linked to EQ bands. So, I don't know, give it a shot, see if you can do anything interesting with it. And this is kind of the precursor to the stuff that I was doing with Dither Timbers and StudioTan. So for people who are looking for that as more of a adjustable plugin, because Dither Timbers and StudioTan work only on quantization, and so they're very subtle effects, and people who are putting those things on buses and things and using them not as a final output, this is probably what you need to be playing with instead. So yeah, this work is supported by Patreon, and if you find plugins of mine that you would have bought for $50 to get the plugin and lifetime support and lifetime updates and also the source code, then jump on the Patreon for another $50 a year per however many plugins you think you would be doing if you were buying them outright. It's a pretty good deal if you're buying them outright. The fact that I'm letting people have them pretty much the they're essentially, you don't get much more free than open source. You could always compile it yourself if you're good at that kind of thing. And I care deeply about letting people have access to these tools, even if they're not making a lot of money on music production, because seriously, guys, who's making lots of money on music production? I don't like sucking money out of people's wallets on the basis of like, oh, I'll make you rich doing music production. That's probably not going to happen. But you can still have the tools. And I can still keep doing this stuff as long as people support the Patreon. And so far that's happening, so it's kind of all good. And on that note, I'll talk to you later. And I got a series of plugins coming out that I think you're going to like. So, thank you very much. Bye-bye.